We would now like to begin the International Symposium, Museums and Research, What Does It Mean to Deepen Art, organized by the National Art Research Center. First of all, we would like to call upon the Director of the National Center for Art Research, Kataoka Mami. Good evening. Thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. Today, we have this overall title of Museums and Research. The National Center for Art Research has brought together and invited curators, artists, and museum people connected with the arts to a closed conference, and this part of the program is open to the public. Today, we are living in the age of diversity. Up to now, gender, cultural values, regions, and actual art practices and media, which have previously been regarded as the minority practices, have now become mainstream and majority wherever you go. So it also is reverse confirmation of the fact that up to now we have only had very limited exposure to art of various kinds. So we also seem to be at the brink of an age of research, where we're going to be finding out more and more. As for the National Center for Art Research, exactly 1 year ago, on the 28th of March, marks the day on which we were formally established, and we have the mission of connecting, deepening, and expanding art. Connecting, deepening, and expanding art mean that we have different vectors or directions, and today we're going to be thinking about the aspect of deepening art. We have the name National Center for Art Research. However, research is not limited to expert fields. We are involved in a very varied and wide-ranging lineup of activities. This gives you some of the evolution of our organization. We currently have 6 national museums, and we also have the National Film Archive, and we also have the specially established independent body, which is the umbrella organization for these institutions. And we are attached to the headquarters of this umbrella organization. Japan, by the way, in terms of museum administration, was one of the earlier countries to establish an infrastructure for museum administration. 1952, we had the opening of the Museum of Modern Art, and we also had the Artisan, and we had this very early opening up of infrastructure and establishment of infrastructure, rather. However, the International Biennale, Triennale, art fairs, as they have increased in number, Japanese museums are now at a point when they need to revamp themselves and to transform themselves into 21st century institutions. At the National Center for Art Research, we have these 4 pillars for utilizing the works, creating this source of information, international information sharing and recognition and exchange. Utilizing what we already have, first of all, we are looking at the collection holdings of the national museums, and the center provides the shipping costs to make it possible to loan these works to museums around the country. We also have had a workshop which has been organized by the Agency for Culture, which has been organized by the government, and we also have provided workshop access for the public as well as experts. We're also going to be hearing from Kawaguchi-san afterwards to form bilingual, concentrated, centralized information about the holdings of the collections for the 198 museums, where we have 28,000 plus pieces which are held in the collections of public and national museums. We also provide all this information about the artists. Also, talking about international networks of being a springboard for information, we are building the network of people between the museums. Also, we have the directors and key people for International Biennale and so forth being invited, and about 20 Japanese curators have already been taken to Korea and also to North America, Canada, and United States this February. As for the artists, for the major Biennale and so forth, we have been extending invitations to directors, and if Japanese artists are chosen to take part, we also provide support to the presentations of Japanese artists. We record that, and we also would like to create a virtuous circle where we are able to channel that information back to Japan. This is one example of support we provide on the occasion of the Shanghai Biennale. So 17 instances with a total of 18 individuals being supported. Learning is another of our activities which have been really strengthened. It's part of our social mission. We provide museum guides to the national museums and also to the National Film Archive as social stories which are designed primarily for individuals with learning disabilities and their family members. We also have fora where we have the connection between well-being, health, and also museums, looking at the United Kingdom, where it's possible to achieve happiness through museums, which we organize for November. As for the individual museums, they also have their own individual separate learning programs, and so there's content which has been created in line with that. We also have working study group opportunities for the educators involved in education and outreach, and we have these annual programs. And with this wide-ranging scope of activity, as we mentioned in the beginning, the deepening aspect is what we'd like to explore in depth. And you might think that research is a natural part of any museum, but the research we're talking about is truly multifaceted. And I think we've all become aware of how deep and how complex it is. And we have the key archive. We're going to be talking about the key archives and also research centers around the world. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Director Kataoka. And now we'd like to begin with the presentations. First from Hong Kong, Özge Ersoy, Senior Curator of the Asia Art Archive.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Kataoka-san for this generous introduction, and also National Center for Art Research for bringing us together. So today in my presentation, I will be speaking about the work of Asia Art Archive. That is a not-for-profit organization based in Hong Kong. And I will be focusing on one of our most recent projects to discuss the way that we try to create this platform that combines art historical research, archival research, and also artistic production. For those of you who are less familiar with Asia Arts Archive, the organization started in the year 2000. And since then, our mission has been to create resources around recent art in Asia and create communities around it. We are a medium-scale team. We have 30 people in our team currently, and that consists of educators, researchers, curators, as well as editors. And collectively, what we try to do is to develop research, to develop programs around it, develop activations, and to share these with the like-minded communities, organizations, art professionals, artists, and researchers. On the screen, you see the photograph of our on-site library in Hong Kong. That is a library that is open to the public 6 days a week. There is no membership. So we try to think about this place as an extension of the public spaces in Hong Kong. And this is also the area where we have exhibitions. All of our public programs happen in the middle of the space. And it's something that I would like to highlight as well. We have the users at the center of the library rather than the resources themselves. And it's something that we've been able to do with the recent renovation that happened 2 years ago. When it comes to our resources, we have 2 types of collections. The first one is the library collections, and the second one is the research collections. When we think about the library collections, we're speaking about more than 50,000 records. These are mainly secondary source materials that you can access in our on-site library. And most of them, I would say more than 85% of these materials, they have been donated to Asia Art Archive. So it's also a big community effort that I would like to highlight here. When it comes to research collections, we currently have more than 76,000 records. These are digital materials that you can access from your own computers, from home, so from anywhere in the world. These are mainly primary source materials that would range from correspondences, photographic documentation, video documentation, and ephemera. And it's a growing repository of digital records that are acquired by our research team. And that's the reason why we'd like to call these archival collections the research collections. This is the webpage of the collections that we have. As you can see on the slide, currently we have 52 collections that are mainly personal archives that belong to artists and art historians. We also have several archives that are about historical exhibitions and independent art spaces. For us, it's very important to digitize these materials, so our expertise is the digitization of these personal archives. We annotate them. This is the work of our research team. Then we upload all these materials online so that they are freely accessible for anyone who's interested in using them. You can say how to cover the entire region. We do know that it's an impossible project, but this is really started as an effort to think about what it means to create a set of resources, primary and secondary source resources for a region, and how we can do these cross-readings between different art scenes and different artistries that have been communicating with each other for a very long time. For us, we also try to think about how to allocate our limited resources, and this is one of the reasons why we have identified a set of content priorities, or the research inquiries, as you like to call them. And these include time-based mediums, such as performance art and exhibition histories, art pedagogy, so how artists themselves, how they shape art schools, as well as independent educational projects, arts writing, so everything that revolves around the artworks, as well as independent art spaces and gender diversity in art history. When we wanted to identify these research interests, we were thinking about the areas in the recent art history in Asia where there is a need for creating more resources and also more research, and to think about how we can collaborate with other researchers, other artists, art historians, to collaboratively, to collectively create these resources together. And when it comes to the personal archives that we have in our collections, I would like to highlight that there's a very particular artist type, let's say, that we are very much interested in, and we call them the nexus artists. So these artists would be the connecting points. These artists would be practicing artists who would be curators, who would be educators, who would be writers or organizers at the same time. And the idea behind this is that when you look at the archive of an individual person, you would not only be able to study the evolution of this particular person, but you would have an understanding of the much larger arts ecology that they have been part of. So this is the type of artistry that we are interested in advocating for. And for today, I would like to highlight the work that we have done over the past 4 years now on the personal archive of Mrinalini Mukherjee, a late artist from India who was known for her sculptural experimentation and experimentation with the medium of fiber in particular. She was born in 1949 and passed away, unfortunately, too early in 2015. And our team worked on Mukherjee's archive for about 3 years, and this is the final result that you can access from your own computers. The archive currently contains more than 2,400 records that are all accessible online, and they are organized according to these 3 structures that you can see on the left side of the screen. So the types of materials that we would have, it would range from photo documentation of artworks and exhibitions to, if you look at the bottom, committee work files, documents on other artists and arts organizations, and also her mother, Leela Mukherjee's archive. And Leela Mukherjee was an artist and educator herself as well. When we were thinking about the Nexus artists, I think Mukherjee is an excellent example. In the archive, we see a lot of documentation about, not only about herself, but about the other artists that she chose to surround herself with. So these are the artistic exchanges that we really would like to highlight. And in the photograph, for instance, on the left side of the screen, you can see the photographs of Gita Kapoor, Vivan Sundaram, Ghulam Mohammed Sheikh, and Nilima Sheikh, among other artists and curators' friends. And I also wanted to emphasize that we do have the digital version of the personal archives that belong to these curators and artists at the same time. Another example would be her active work in advisory committees in different arts organizations and museums in the 1980s and 1990s. And on the right hand of the screen, you see a document from the early 1990s when Mukherjee was part of the advisory board of the National Gallery of Modern Art in New Delhi. And this is a document that is an internal, let's say, record that shows the type of exhibitions that the advisory board was discussing with the museum team about the traveling exhibition, things that they would like to have in India, and also the exhibitions that they would be interested in traveling outside of the country as well. And after we work on the exhibition, it's also very important that we try to think about what are the ways to activate these resources. So in this case, we wanted to start with an exhibition. So my colleagues, Nupur, Pallavi, and Samira, they worked on this exhibition in close collaboration with our team in Hong Kong, and curated this exhibition that was titled Mold the Wing to Match the Photograph. And in the exhibition, we wanted to create a dialogue between a historical artwork that was on loan from a private art museum, Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in New Delhi, and that was a work from 1986, in conversation with the archival materials that belongs to the artist's personal archive. This artwork called Pari is an amazing example of the experimentation the artist had with the fiber material and how she created these large-scale fiber artworks that would be symmetrical and that would have these very intricate knotting techniques. And here, for us, it was also a way to think about the existing scholarship about this particular artist. And the existing scholarship is very much around the ideas of intuition and improvisation, and which is the way that she worked during her artistic practice. And in the archive, and which brings me to the thesis of the exhibition, we see something different. The argument that we wanted to make with this exhibition is that the archive has the potential of changing the existing scholarship about this particular artist. Sometimes we think about archives to deepen the understanding of an artist's practice, but in this case, it was really showing something that we did not necessarily talked about or we did not necessarily write about before. And it was really about the precision, the measurement that the artist had when it comes to the documentation and the circulation of her artworks. Here we have the example of the contact sheets. It's a small selection of the contact sheets that we were able to find in the archive. And the time period is between 1970 and 2000. And if you look closer to these materials, you will see how Mukherjee, with her let's say photographer friends and artist friends, how they were photographing the documents after the artworks were complete. So there was this really interesting tension that was quite puzzling to our team. On the one hand, you have fiber, that's a malleable material that changes over time, that ages over time, that droops over time. And on the other side, we have Mukherjee photographing these materials and having these very precise markings to think about how to fix the form of something that is not fixable. So it's something that we've been thinking about a lot with this exhibition. And the document that you see on the right-hand side, it's an A4 size document from the archive, and it's an example of the installation instructions that Mukherjee created during her lifetime. And this one belongs to the artwork that we had in the exhibition, and it dates back to 1986 as well. And it does something quite interesting for us. Of course, it gives these very specific measurements about how to install the artwork. For instance, if you look at the middle size of the sculpture that Mukherjee calls the wings, she says that it has to be 83 centimeters, which is quite different because there are no metal wires in the sculpture. So the title of the show, Molding to Match the Photograph, also corresponds to one of the quotes, one of the statements that we found in these installation instructions. And she does something different as well. If you look at number 7, for instance, it says, it has to be viewed from all sides and need space all around. So it's not only about the perfect display and installation of the artwork, it's also about the viewer's encounter with the artwork. And in other installation instructions from the 80s and 1990s, we also see that she would give very precise, let's say, suggestions or rules about how to maintain the artwork, how to create the creating of the artwork, or how to vacuum clean the artwork. So for us, it's almost like the portrait of the artist, the detail and the meticulousness of the way that she was thinking about these fiber sculptures that are basically meant to age and change over time. And in the exhibition space in the library, for instance, if you look at the photograph on the left, you see that the A4 size installation instruction, it is enlarged to the scale of the artwork itself that you can see on the right. So from this very particular vantage point, we were able to put these two records, let's say the artwork and the archival material, in conversation with each other, and they are of the same scale. And this is a type of conversation that we are very much interested in creating in our exhibitions. The second example would be the 35 millimeter slides. This was also quite an interesting part of the archive. There were more than 20,000 slides that we were able to find. And these are the reproductions of the 700 of them that focuses on the photographed version of the artwork. Sometimes they are in the gallery space, sometimes they are in the garage, which was her studio, and sometimes they're in the garden. So very different from the way that we would experience them in the museum space, which is the usual encounter site for Mukherjee's artworks. The last section of the exhibition was a little bit more speculative, I would say. When our researchers were working on the archive, all these slides and contact sheets, they were quite disorganized in a way. They were in boxes, but there was one meticulously organized part of the archive, which was the travel photographs. So in this section, what we wanted to do was to think about the research, the artistic research. What was the reference points for Mukherjee? Because during her lifetime, she did not give a lot of interviews. She talked in quite indirect ways about the research references that she was using for her artwork. And for us, we wanted to think about the recurring patterns, the motifs that we can find in this very organized part of the archive, which made us think that she was probably going back to these materials quite regularly. So we would like to speculate that if we want to think about the artistic research, this is the set of materials that we will be focusing on. Let's say if we were to write an art historical paper about this particular subject. And for the last 3 slides, I would like to give you examples of the type of programs that we have developed around this exhibition. The first example is a conversation between different researchers and curators. You see my colleague Samira on the right, and she's in conversation here with Riksa Afiati, a curator from Indonesian Visual Art Archive, and Yu Xiaowei, who's a translator, editor, and writer who's been working a lot about artist archives. So in this case, we really wanted to expand the conversation not only to India or South Asia, but to try to think about how the researchers in different parts of Asia, they are dealing with this idea of what is an artist's instruction? When is it an artwork? When is it an archival document? And what are the ways of activating them, either through exhibitions or publications? The second example I wanted to bring to you today is an artist performance. In this case, we have Movana Chan, a Hong Kong and Lisbon-based artist who's been making knitted sculptures for the past 20 years. And her response to this exhibition was this 1 hour long performance where she invited Francisco Borges, a dancer, to join her to activate one of the knitted sculptures that she worked. And for us, it was an amazing way to think, being in the space, to think about stillness, sculpture, performance, and movement at the same time. The last example I would like to share with you was a dance workshop, a somatic movement workshop that was led by David Leung, who's a choreographer and dancer based in Hong Kong. And David has been teaching contact improvisation dance for the past 20 years. So he was very much interested in this idea of when Mukherjee as an artist, when she stops being improvisational and when she starts being instructional. So this is what he does in his dance classes as well. So he led a workshop where a group of us, 15 of us, were going through his instructions about how to move our bodies in the library space. So this is the last slide that I would like to share with you today, where I would like to just highlight once more the key ideas that are at the forefront for our team. We are a research-based organization, and obviously the collections that we have, they sit at the foundation, at the very center of our team. When we think about archives and also ways of activating the archives, artists are always at the forefront for us, and we keep learning from them. We want to be propositional, we want to make arguments, we want to not only present the research that we do, but also, especially through the exhibitions, we do want to have certain clear stakes about why we are doing the work and how we are contributing to the existing scholarship. And the last point is the experiential way of learning. As you might, think about it, we are a library and we are an archive, and oftentimes there are more rational ways or more cognitive ways of learning. We go, we read, we listen, we ask questions, we analyze. But for us, we also want to promote and support different ways of learning, and especially through our bodies, in relation to our bodies, to the space, to the artwork, and also to other bodies in that particular space. So this is where I would like to stop, and I would like to thank to all of you for being here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So next is Masako Kawaguchi. She is the head of the research resources for the National Center of Art Research.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kawaguchi Masako, and I am a head of research resources for the National Center for Art Research. I will be talking about our website Art Platform Japan today. The purpose of NCAR is to promote and deepen art, and I believe that supporting research activities by providing research resources is important for this purpose. So that's why I'm focusing on our research portal site in this presentation. 国立アートリサーチセンターの川口と申します。
So I am Kawaguchi from NCAR. As you can see from the flyer, what's important in order to deepen art is to support research activities by providing research resources, and that is why I'm focusing on research portal site in this presentation. So let me say this at the outset. We are an organization without a real physical reading rooms. From the name Research Center, perhaps you would imagine us to be something like a library, but we do not have a physical space like that. So what do we offer? Well, we offer Art Platform Japan, which is on the internet. It's a website. This website was launched 3 years ago, before the launch of NCAR itself, and this was a project of the Cultural Affairs Agency. And we have carried this on, and we have carried on the name of the project and used it as the name of the website. And so this virtual space, APJ, we would like to make it function as a research portal for the art in Japan. Now, Japanese art, I think, we are not able to carry on this big question about reconstructing the frame of the Japanese art itself. That's too much big of a burden, but we would like to at least explain to you what we are assuming. There are two perspectives to this. One is the Japanese art itself. So, for example, as an artist who have helped develop the Japanese art is the Italian painter who was the first to teach at a Japanese arts university, so we can provide information on that artist. We can also provide information on the exhibition called Japon de Avant-Garde, which was held in Paris. So this will be a subject of the information that we would also capture. The other is art in Japan, so that will be a collection of the museum. However, at this current point in time, most of the data we collect is the Japanese modern and contemporary artworks. So we hope to expand this going forward. So who are we trying to deliver this research resource of the art in Japan? So let's say if the purpose of the site visitor is work or hobby, or is he or she able to use Japanese language skills or not? Let's just say we categorize it in that way. The target of our website will be mostly a C or D in this quadrant. In other words, it would be an ordinary user, or it could be an expert, which you would assume to be an expert who speaks Japanese. So it's actually a very extreme, two extremes. However, when you focus on NCAR's main mission of connecting the art in Japan with the world, A is most important. So that would be curator, critics, researchers who are in the international scene. They would require information, specialized in information. However, they are not able to use the language skills. Maybe university students who have just begun studying the Japanese art as well. So what sort of contents are required in order to deliver information to these people? Naturally, it must be available in English, and it must be useful for research. For this reason, the main point is how do we make it available in English, and how do we and accessible in English, and how do we connect this information to people? We talk about language, but I think we have been discussing quite a bit about what the language that has been written. But here, we believe that it's essential that we're able to explain this in word, but it has to be in English. And in fact, to say furthermore, it has to be available in Latin language. Now, when we say information in Japan, we tend to think about it's synonymous as something that's correct, that has no error. And in terms of the perspective about whether it's truth or a fact, I think we had a closed workshop, and in it, Mr. Hikari Fuji made a presentation, and he mentioned about that. And I believe that we want to put aside whether we would determine this as a truth or not, but I think it's important that we communicate facts as facts. So that attitude is important. So the person that's actually sending the information must focus on communicating objective data and just entrust it to the recipient's literacy. So that sort of neutrality and objectivity would help information to become more open. And I know that this is probably very much a common sense in the research institutions around the world, but I think this is an area of weakness in Japan still. NCAR needs to continue to learn from the precedent outside of Japan, and we have just made one step forward, but I think I would like to mention about 3 initiatives in specific that we engage in. One is the English translations of important Japanese literature. This is a project that we have actually carried over from the Agency for Cultural Affairs art platform. So at NCAR, we have a cross-functional initiative that is carried out by my group and also by International Coalition Group. Now, this morning, Mr. Ma Jong-yon has, in the morning session, explained about the English translation of his own literature, and of course, which literature to be translated has different standards. I have mentioned 2 here, but whatever is advanced, we try to make sure that we would avoid duplications with MoMA. And this is MoMA's research results. You can see a significant amount of Japanese literature is being translated here. This is our website. We are currently reviewing the structure of our website. So there's slight issues with the access to the translated literature. So in other words, it's difficult to access right now, but we're planning to improve on it. So please be patient with us. In any case, you will see an upload of important literature on photography and media. And whatever the English translation has been completed, it's downloadable. And this is the screen of the individual literature. You can download the English text. The second project I want to introduce is the database on the collections of museums and other institutions across Japan. Again, this has been carried on from the Agency for Cultural Affairs. This database has been established thanks to the cooperation of many museums. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all the museums that have participated and cooperated. And with the data provision from each of these museums, we would do the data editing work using these data. And there's a lot of technologies that have been developed in terms of data linkage. And so in light of that, to manually edit data seems very outdated, perhaps in a traditional in a good way. But there are many museums in Japan that have not been able to make their own database public. So this is most effective at this point in time. In fact, in some of the data that we have received, we have seen some data that has been made public for the first time. And I think Mito Museum has just made that report this morning in the workshop as well. So that I'm very grateful for that information. And there are some data with no English to it. So we need to enhance it in two ways in order to make it available in English. The blue on the right-hand side, blue ink, this is the additions, enhancement in the alphabet of the artist's name. And also in gray, it says one cherry, very small. But this is machine translation. So we implemented machine translation. And machine translation is just on the surface. But the blue, so the artist names, is actually connected with the real data. And the reason for that is for search. So individual data on the works, by connecting it with the romanized artists' names, you will be able to input Hamaguchi Yozo in alphabets, and then you'll be able to search him. And again, the list of the search results has room for improvement as well. But in any case, this is a database that targets all the cultural assets in Japan. It has English interface, and it's searchable by alphabet. And in fact, this is quite epoch-making. And this doesn't look spectacular, so you may not appear to be so, but that's what it is. It's actually quite dramatic. And we do not have a lot of works listed here yet, so we would like to continue and enhance on this with the cooperation of different museums. And the third project I want to introduce is a new project which just went live this month. It's called Japan Dictionary of Artists. And this is a new project that we started since we launched as an NCAR. This is targeting the artists of modern and contemporary days who have contributed to the Japanese art and culture. The number is still few, but we are adding data that would be contributes to researches as well. So on the page of a female painter called Fukushima Hideko, you can see all these different variations of her. Her name is displayed. Here's her biography. This is exhibitions. And this is the main museum holdings. And here's the literature bibliography. So information such as exhibitions and literatures, it's actually a very familiar items in artist dictionaries and catalog resonance and auction catalogs, which is pretty standard in the world. But in Japan, we have never been very passionate about having this kind of information and data available in both Japanese and English. So this is first in Japan. And in fact, I want to boast that this is, a Japanese artist, and it's a comprehensive dictionary, and it's available online. I mean, certain conditions are limited, but I think I would say this is first of the kind in Japan. And also this bibliography. Here, for example, you saw this in the workshop yesterday, but this is the location information of the documents groups that are published by museums and universities. So, for example, if the organization that has information about data about Hideko Fukushima, then we'll be able to search that and locate that. Slightly different, but a similar example here is there's an external organization called Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties, and there's an article about that. So by linking these important information, different parts of Japan, really is an important role as a portal. And let me scroll it down. This is the authority files. So for example, Getty Research Institute. Let me jump to that. So Getty Research Institute has this union list of artist names, which shows you which record is applicable to. So, for example, if you could recall hashtags on the social media, it's very similar to that. So, for example, if you try to link an artist name to one book or a catalog, you want to make sure that you're linked to that individual rather than another individual with the same name. And if you are able to do that linking, then you will be able to improve the accuracy of search. So this is called authority control in a library term. Furthermore, the related information is the link to the information in APJ. So you have the work, and then you have the translated literature. So if that literature is available, then you will be able to access the English information. And finally, I want to give you my input on what does it mean to be accessible in English. So on this website, the bibliographic information and exhibition information are in Romanized languages or transliteration. So it's not necessarily in English. In Japan, when we think that we need to have information available for the international community, we think the only option is in English. And this is a lot of work, and this is one of the reasons why we're not able to have that information in English. But what's important is that because a lot of people are not able to input, Japanese fonts into the keyboard. So rather than to have them do that, we need to make it people to search where and what information is available, because if they can get that information, they will be able to move to the next step, even if they're not able to read Japanese. So they can see that this is an important information on this website. But so because I can't read it, I will go find someone that can read it, or maybe I can just put it in a machine translation. So once you're able to approach that step. So in that sense, transliteration and Romanization are options, and I want to really emphasize that those are other options, alternatives to just translation into English. Romanization is actually a globally common method that's used in non-Latin languages. In fact, the Library of Congress, which is one of the major libraries of the world, has published a list of Romanization tables. Japanese is also available too. So how do we make use of this kind of information? So this is an artist, Kaburaki Kiyotaka. In terms of the history of the exhibition, there's Teikoku Bijutsu-in, and actually that stands for Imperial Fine Arts Academy. So this is a Japanese art academy, and it's an exhibition of that. But here it's Romanized. It says Teikoku Bijutsu-in Bijutsu Tenrankai. So it's converted into alphabet. And with this title, and if you do a search in OCLC WorldCat, which is it's a library catalog that many Japanese or many users out in and out of Japan use. When you do a search there, you will be able to actually get a good search result, even in romanization. And from this catalog, you can tell that it's held by Royal Ontario Museum. So once you get that information, then if you're a researcher, you know exactly what you need to do next. And by the way, this catalog is already digitalized by that earlier Tokyo Institute. And you can also do a search on Getty research portal. So in other words, you can get this information online. But if you look at it carefully, the database has the title in Japanese original and English translation, so there's no romanization. So in this case, you're not able to search by romanization. But just to supplement, this isn't a data deficiency because this English translation, and I'm pointing that with an arrow, but this is the actual material. So the English translation is the original material. However, these are sort of the contents that we expect to continue to see furthermore in the future. So in terms of trying to connecting with the people appropriately, I think it's important that we need to control the technical terms in the exhibitions as well. So I think one way to do this is to have a bilingual glossary like this. And as a byproduct of the activities so far, we have something sort of a prototype which we could probably work on and maybe be able to publish it in the future. And systemization of such technical terms is an element that's essential in order to deepen research, not just limited to the art, but just in any areas. But in Japan, such research infrastructure has not really sufficiently developed over the years yet. So lastly, the project that I have introduced today is really about a battle against stored data and records, archivable materials, ephemeral documents, and these are all the materials that are spread out everywhere, whether it's written and not written. And we need to make it available as a resource and searchable. And it's a battle that continues on. So if APJ wants to continue to play its role as a research portal for that art in Japan, we need to continue to challenge on this task. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Ms. Kawaguchi.
Next, we'd like to call upon the founder of Hzone in Seoul, director of the same institution, Mr. Lee Daehyung.
皆さんこんばんは。はじめまして。どうぞよろしくお願いします。Good afternoon. My name is Daehyung Lee. I'm a curator from Seoul, South Korea. I've been curating for the last 25 years, and I want to meet you all again as a curator for the next 25 years. Today, under the title, The Curating the Future, I will explain the strategy, methodology, and roles of a curator with my previous project. For me, curating begins with interpreting the flow of information and flow of thought and flow of zeitgeist. In 2020, the Reframing the Museum Symposiums held jointly by Louvre Abu Dhabi and NYU Abu Dhabi focused a special highlighted the paradigm shift from the Museum of Collection to the Museum of Program, from the Museum of History to the Museum of the Future Agenda. The camp residency program in France brings together artists, scientists, entrepreneurs in equal measure, 33% each, to test creative energy and synergy among the art, technology, and business. To understand the world, we need at least 3 key lenses: the business perspective for data analysis, the scientific method for processing real-time information, and the creative imagination for generating new ideas. We cannot navigate our future using only past data or incomplete algorithm or the formula. Gottfried Stoker from Ars Electronica said, culture shape technology, and technology becomes culture, and that culture shape technology again. This is infinite, the loop of symbiotic relation between the culture and technology that has to be addressed in my presentations. Transitioning from the 20th century, where discourse was centered on transnational context due to geopolitical conflict, the 21st century has introduced a new dimension with the advancement of digital technology. This era is characterized by transgenerational context and highlighting the information gap between generations. Transnational, generational, planetary thinking, trans technology, and there'll be more trans line, the boundary, the keyword. And these various streams of thought will form boundaries. In essence, curation is all about defining the line among these conceptual borderline. We are witnessing another interesting shift. Sponsors are evolving from simple art buyer to program sponsor. This is good news, focusing on long-term impact and social value. Good example include the Hyundai Tate Research Center Transnational and the Chanel sponsored Idea Museum Ecological Turn at Samsung Lium. In 2020, I initiated the public art project Connect BTS, connecting 22 artists in five cities. Initially, some were quite skeptical about collaboration between K-pop and contemporary art. However, the diversity inherent in BTS music philosophy, the potential for global solidarity and inclusive nature of BTS fandom army proved to be a compelling cultural phenomenon. Fandom today is not just a passing trend, it's a sustainable global movement that champions as an inclusive worldview. It symbolizes a novel narrative in cultural exchange, anchored in digital communities, share the social value, and desire for a positive impact. Of course, there was a skepticism about collective curatorial project. However, we came to believe that by embracing collective actions, we can significantly broaden the scope and impact of art for our future generations. This belief has led to everyone involved in becoming a dedicated ambassador for the Connect BTS project. You can see Noemi Solomon and Stefan Lugenthal and Hans-Uli Obrist and Anthony Gomley and Ben Vickers, Thomas Haraseno, and many more interesting artists from everywhere. Philosophically speaking, Connect BTS project reflects Edward Glissant's archipelago theory, showing how distinct entities like an island are interconnected by the vast ocean. This concept is about the symbiotic relationship between cultural individuality and global interconnectedness. It symbolizes how countries like Korea and Japan, and indeed Asia with other continents, are interconnected through planet Earth. Connect BTS, the project spanned 5 cities, including Berlin. We choose Berlin because its historical significance with the Berlin Wall. I remember the moment in 1989 with my parents when the wall collapsed. However, today we face invisible wall, thicker and higher, that cannot be torn down with a physical hammer or physical force. Therefore, together with BTS and 22 artists, we use art as a social vaccine, aiming to dissolve the walls of hate and antagonism. In the heart of Gropiusbau, near Berlin walls, Bill Fontana's sound art unfolds. Close your eye and listen. You can hear it, right? The gentle breathing, the heartbeat and pulse of a tree that has stood for 3,000 years. this 3,000 years of miracles brings you, everyone here, to a powerful realizations. I am because we are. It's a reminder of our shared humanity, our connection to the earth, and our unity that underlies our existence. In Argentina, we launched the Thomas Harras Energy Fly with Ersoy Pacha in Salinas Grandes, located 3,500 meters high. Let's watch the video.
Dear sun, spiders, earth, air, cosmic webs, mountains, vicuñas, clouds, and bacteria. Humans have always dreamed of flying, but today, this dream has become a nightmare. Muchas de estas a varios pesos.
This project overturns a half-century of male-dominated colonialism and conquest history, featuring a female pilot flying without fossil fuels. The project also reveals the environmental cost of lithium mining, consuming 2 million liters of clean water for just 1 ton of lithium. It's an urgent call to recognize the sacrifice under the shadow of our civilizations. Let's watch another video. This powerful assembly, you can see. The theater is a part of CCK in Buenos Aires. It has 1,500 seats, but it's overpopulated with 1,800. The people flocked. So those young peoples, they never passed the threshold of the gallery space. This is their very first encounter with contemporary art. So this project highlights our collective passion for the arts, art, and the step we must take together with actions. In 2017, at the Venice Biennale, Korean Pavilion explored how many hours people need to work for their family's breakfast. This question led to developing clocks moving at different speed. Each clock personalized with the name, birth year, profession, and nationality. The 668 clocks, each moving at different speed and thus being the most inaccurate, ironically reflect the life of individuals around the world most accurately. This is the formula to decide the speed of a clock, connecting science, economic, sociology, and mathematics. Can you see? Each clock has a battery, but some couldn't last even a week before running out. This happened because some of them were moving way more faster, like 10 times, 20 times faster than the normal speed of a clock. We sold 3 types of newspaper. I did really another interesting social experimentations. We set the price in a currency of a buyer's home country, like Japanese pay in yen, and American pays in dollar to test humanitarian value of the money. However, this social experiment failed because everyone converted their money to European euro. Anyway, the proceeds successfully donated to We Are Here Venice, this NGO group. When I made a donation, I was asked, in the 120 years of Venice Biennale, we've never seen a donation from a non-Italian pavilion. What made you think of this? I replied, walking through the St. Mark Square, I was just struck by the beauty of Italian architecture and cultural heritage. And it's the same feeling you'd get visiting Gyeongbok Palace in Seoul. Art has a deep root, but the beauty they create is something the whole world can enjoy. So protecting Venice's environment and cultural heritage isn't just an Italian job. It's something we all should do together. However, there was just hidden lovely story. I was really moved after I later to find out that even though we hadn't hit our fundraising goal, the Italian staff working at the Korean pavilion, they chipped in from their own pocket to ensure we could make successful donations. Now we face a choice. Let boundaries define us, while we shape our future beyond those boundaries. Often we don't recognize the institutional gravity that holds us back. It acts like a law of gravity on our thought and action, force we must overcome to imagine beyond the boundaries. Like a satellite view of Earth, we gain a better understanding of ourselves when we free ourselves from these institutional gravities. Here, institution doesn't necessarily mean the museum. Institution can be your nationality, or your passport can be institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'd like to call upon.
Next, we have from Los Angeles, Getty Research Institute, Ms. Kara for Olidge.
Good evening. I'm Kara Olidge, Associate Director, Collections Discovery of the Getty Research Institute. I want to thank the organizers and NCAR for inviting me to be a part of the symposium. Today, I will provide an overview of the J. Paul Getty Trust, recent changes at the Getty, and present challenges and perspectives of the Getty's Research Institute's operations. Now, while this presentation will focus on infrastructure and technical challenges, it is essentially about a cultural shift from 20th century practices of empire and patriarchy to a more inclusive culture inquiring collections, terms of access, and use of resources. So when we think about the question of how to deepen art, it is really about how to be responsive to community, both externally and internally. It is these matters that have created an existential dilemma for large resource Western institutions like the Getty when they need to consider what it means to be a 21st century research institution. Okay. All right, so to talk about the Getty Research Institute, it is important to understand the J. Paul Getty Trust. And as you see, the J. Paul Getty Trust is considered the world's wealthiest art institution with an estimated endowment of $9.8 billion as of 2023, with roughly 1,400 staff members. The trust is a private operating foundation that was founded by the American oil billionaire J. Paul Getty in 1953 for the purpose of establishing the trust. I just lost my document here, so let me just go back to the file. Okay, there we go. For the purpose of establishing the J. Paul Getty Museum, which opened to the public in 1954. Okay, it comprises 4 entities. It's the museum, which we have 2, the Getty Museum and the Cener in Los Angeles, houses European paintings, drawings, sculptures, illuminated manuscripts, decorative arts, and photography from its beginnings to the present. There's also the museum at the Getty Villa in Malibu, which serves as a museum and educational center dedicated to the study of the arts and cultures of ancient Greece, Rome, and Etruria. The foundation partners with people and organizations in Los Angeles around the world by awarding grants that support art historical scholarships, conserve art and architecture, increase access to museums, collections, and archives, and train visual arts professionals. The foundation focuses on funding 4 core areas: art history, conservation, museum, and archival collections and professional development. And there is also the Conservation Institute, or what we call as GCI, works internationally to advance conservation practice in visual arts, objects, collections, architecture, and heritage sites. And then the Research Institute, which we will talk about extensively today, is dedicated to furthering knowledge and advancing understanding of the visual arts and their various histories. Through its expertise, active collecting program, public programs, institutional collaborations, exhibitions, publications, digital services, and residential scholars programs. So what are the recent changes at the Getty? We have new leadership. In 2022, Dr. Catherine E. Fleming was appointed as the president and CEO of the Getty. She has developed 4 key strategic priorities, which include creating a sustainability program to respond to the current and future global social environmental concerns, to reduce the Getty and its staff's footprint with travel, single-use plastics, and food consumption. Regarding philanthropy, she continues the co-stewarding projects where the Getty subsidizes processing an archive and deposits the physical archive with the partnering institution. She's also redesigned our Getty Medal Award so that artists who are recognized for their work can select a nonprofit of their choosing to receive a $500,000 grant from the Getty. She's also working with our senior team to create dynamic experiences to foster intergenerational learning and immersive digital experiences. And she acknowledges, and we also admit to this, that while the Getty has a global presence, the programs and services remain opaque. So we're working to become more legible. Okay. The unique characteristics of the Getty Research Institute. So what's very exciting about the Research Institute? The Getty Research Institute, under the leadership of Mary Miller, was restructured in 2020 to consolidate 9 departments into 3 divisions to create efficiencies in meeting the Getty's vision. Those divisions are the Collections and Discovery, which collect and preserve and provide access to materials to create innovative research; Dissemination and External Affairs, which focuses on audiences, scholars, enthusiasts, and the public; and Research and Knowledge Creation, which is essential to the mission of the Getty Research Institute because it builds upon our unique resources and fosters scholarly communities and intellectual growth. Our staffing currently, we have 196 full-time employees, and we have 39 limited-term employees. Now, what makes the GRI unique? Okay. Our research and library collections of rare materials and digital resources serve an international community of scholars and the interested public that reflect and document the overall development of humanity. To accomplish this ongoing effort, 117 staff members collectively manage 72,000 rare books, 27,000 single prints and drawings, 800 collections of rare photographs, and over 120,000 linear feet of manuscripts and archives, along with optical devices, architectural models, audiovisual recordings, and terabytes of digital files. It also offers library research grants, which provide partial short-term support for researchers requiring the use of specific collections housed at the GRI. And so here we see some examples of the collections that we have. The top are from our library, and the second one in the middle is from the Fluxus collection, and also the last one is from an exhibition, Reinventing the Americas, where we had an artist, an indigenous artist, reimagine 17th century texts. With the Scholars Program, since 1985, the Scholars Program has hosted more than 1,800 residential scholars from over 59 countries to research topics related to the annual themes while residing in Los Angeles. Selected projects have spanned geographical regions and periods from ancient to contemporary eras. Getty receives roughly 300 to 400 applications each year and awards fellowships to about 20 applicants annually. The Scholar Program supports innovative research about art, conceived in the broadest terms in its histories, by providing a locus for international scholars to forge collaborations across disciplines and professional practices, while also developing new audiences for their work. We also have special initiatives. The Getty Vocabularies are structured resources for the visual arts domain, including art, architecture, decorative arts, and other cultural works. Complying with international standards for structured and controlled vocabularies, they provide authoritative information for catalogers, researchers, and data providers. Getty Vocabularies contain co-references to other resources where topics overlap. They are unique in their global coverage of the defined domain and citing published resources. The African American Art History Initiative focuses on the history, practices, and cultural legacies of artists of African Americans and African diasporic heritage. The initiative's major areas of development include archive and library acquisitions, oral histories, and public dissemination through interpretive programs and publications. Okay. And one of the questions we had today about the ways to access or have pathways to research. And as Masako mentioned earlier today, the Research Portal is a collaborative project initiated by the GRI in 2012. Founded with a group of international contributors, including the portal aggregates access to an ever-increasing number of digitized art historical texts from a growing list of contributors. With this corpus of art historical literature, the portal has the potential to innovate how art histories conduct research, providing a single search approach to an exponentially richer collection that could ever be made available through the resources of a single library. It is an especially useful tool for scholars and students without access to a major art history library. And so, as you see, one of our books there, Controlled Vocabularies. There's also in the center, Samela Lewis, who's considered the godmother of African American art, and also the display of antiquarian books and pre-Hispanic ceramics circa 1960s that you can find in the portal. Okay. So what are the challenges and perspectives on sustainable operations for the Getty Research Institute? Getty is committed to promoting diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion across the organization. Our value statements reinforce our commitment to building a climate of mutual understanding, respect, trust, transparency, and cooperation. We have established a formalized structure to facilitate an exchange of ideas related to improving DEAI at the Getty. However, implementing DEAI policies requires a cultural shift, one that takes time and resources. These changes did not materialize instantly, so the institution is challenged by the time to implement the policies and address the institution's culture with the immediate needs of the staff. Defining a collection scope for the 21st century. The holdings of the Research Library and Special Collections comprise some of the most valuable collections and resources for the study of visual culture in the world. As we continue to grow, a clear collecting policy helps guide us in deliberating what items we will make discoverable. However, we must ask ourselves this moment of extraction and repatriation, does the GRI need to continue collecting in the same manner? or would the material be better suited to a different institution? We must also weigh the logistical impact of a collection. Do we physically have the capacity, in terms of both processing, staff, and storage, to collect at our current rate? Thirdly, developing a future for digital infrastructure. Research libraries, research libraries can hold tremendously rare and valuable resources, but unless they make such materials available for study, they remain static repositories of information as opposed to being agents of discovery and innovation. A major focus of the Research Library and Special Collections is thus making our resources as accessible as possible. The GRI digital initiatives are defined by two major priorities. First, to produce digital resources that advance scholarly access and discovery, and second, to conduct scholarship that builds upon the capabilities of those resources and feeds back into their enhancement. It's an exciting time to be working on digital initiatives at the GRI. The sophistication of technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, and massive level data processing keeps improving, opening our eyes to a realm of possible directions that research on visual culture might go. Successful digital initiatives depend, however, on having the right people in place who can analyze data in meaningful ways and implement the digital tools and technologies necessary for achieving target research outcomes. To accomplish this work, we must ensure that our staffing and infrastructure are operating at peak potential. Lastly, recruiting talent and space. Currently, we have a facility that was designed in the early 2000s. The space is circular, and it does not afford the opportunity for expansion. So we're trying to address those issues and thinking about how we can build collaborative partnerships and think differently about our space to increase our staff. With staffing is being increasingly challenging in the market to be competitive. There are ideas of wanting more of a quality of life. Los Angeles can be very expensive, and so there are challenges with hiring them and retaining our talent. And so we're working to do that as well. And then finally, I just wanted to share with you all resources at the Getty Research Institute. These are resources that you can access in terms of the library and special collections, our research news, grants and fellowships, and employment opportunities. And by the way, I just want to mention today that we are conducting a search for a chief curator. So if someone's interested in joining the Getty Research Institute, we would be happy for you to submit your credentials because we'd be excited to discuss the opportunity with you. And lastly, I just want to say thank you. These are the resources that I use for the presentation, and I'm happy to discuss further how we are trying to change and pivot towards a more inclusive environment where we're actually practicing the idea of shuva, where people are seen, heard, understood, valued, and appreciated. And so thank you for the opportunity to present tonight.
原さん、ありがとうございました。
So let's move on. So we have Carmen Ramírez, who is the curator of Latin American art and director of ICAA at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. Carmen was unfortunately not able to come to Japan because of illness. However, she has video recorded her presentation, so we will run that video. So please look at the screen.
Good afternoon. I am Carmen Ramírez, Wardam Curator of Latin American Art and Director of the International Center for the Arts of the Americas at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. I would like to thank the National Center for Art Research and Mami Kataoka for the invitation to participate in this symposium. I am very sorry that I cannot be there with you today due to COVID. However, it is both an honor and a pleasure to share with all of you my experience building a major center for Latin American and Latino art at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston over the last 23 years. The MFAH is a 100-year-old encyclopedic institution. The origins of this initiative go back to 2001, when the museum established an endowed curatorial department together with a research center, the International Center for the Arts of the Americas, or ICAA, focused on this art. Such a strategic move, the first of its kind in any U.S. museum, underscored the financial and ethical commitment of this institution with what were then rapidly emergent fields of scholarship and curatorial expertise. In this talk, I would thus like to engage some of the conceptual and practical issues posed by this unprecedented research and collection building effort, while simultaneously introducing you to some of its highlights. Before doing so, however, it is important to briefly sketch the context that justifies such an ambitious undertaking. The ubiquity of a project focused on Latino American art in Texas' largest city and one of the most diverse in the country should not come as a surprise. As we know, Texas shares a 1,248-mile border with Mexico, a fact that sets it apart from the rest of the United States, except for California and Arizona. To this history must be added the enduring presence since the colonial period of Mexican nationals, Mexican Americans or Chicanos, as well as the continuous influx of immigrants, initially from Mexico, but in the last few decades also from Central and South America and the Caribbean, who have made Texas their home. With a population of 2.4 million, over 45% of which is Latino, Houston has not been immune to the radical demographic trends that are significantly altering the state and the country in general. Indeed, 63% of the city's school-age population today is Latino. These facts, together with a long tradition of cultural philanthropy grounded in the city's large share of the oil, gas, commercial shipping, and medical industries, played a significant role in the MFAH's decision to embrace modern and contemporary Latino American art and turn them into core elements of its mission. I should underscore that in 2001, these areas were not only emergent fields of study and collecting, but represented artists who had been traditionally excluded from the canon of art history. At the ICAA, the goal of redressing that exclusion led to the establishment of the center's hemispheric flagship project, known as Documents of Latin American and Latino Art. This is a digital archive and publications project that aims to preserve the intellectual legacy of these heterogeneous communities, as well as build bridges between them. Such an archival undertaking, however, does not refer to a physical repository of documents, but to a digitally based access project. This means that the archives from which the documents are culled never leave their respective countries. Instead, they are scanned, cataloged, annotated, and uploaded to the project's website, where they are accessible free of charge to users from all over the globe who regularly consult them. Jacques Derrida's notion of the archive as a political tool provided the conceptual foundation for the project. For Derrida, the archive is more than just a physical repository of national, state, or private histories. It is instead an emblem of a particular individual or group's origins and foundational history, and as such, it entails a shared experience that must be agreed upon. Hence, by embracing the archive, the museum was recognizing, legitimizing, and ultimately participating in the group's history. In my view, this is not only the starting point for conceptualizing museum-based archives today, but the foundation for a series of critical practices intent upon countering the prevailing status quo while recovering the memory of oppressed groups and marginalized peoples. The ICAA archives documents include manifestos and programmatic texts, personal and institutional letters, articles in magazines and art reviews, statements by artist coalitions and organizations, exhibition catalogs and invitations, artist notes, and/or excerpts from journals. The aim is to reveal the ideas that led to the creation of specific works of art or artistic movements, and to recognize, where applicable, the pioneering role of many Latin American and Latino artists vis-a-vis modernism and postmodernism. Yet, what distinguishes the ICAA Documents Project from other initiatives of this nature is the team-based, directed effort that has been placed at identifying, securing, cataloging, and publishing the documents in both digital and print format. Between 2005 and today, at least 22 ad hoc teams of researchers were organized in 20 Latin American and US cities. Next slide, please. Such an unprecedented collective undertaking, in turn, involved an extensive continental network of partner institutions consisting of museums, universities, research foundations, as well as art historians, curators, librarian catalogers, image and data specialists, editors, and translators. At the peak of the project's recovery phase, close to 200 researchers and visual arts professionals across the Americas could claim some kind of official affiliation to this project. Once the documents have been selected and scanned, the Houston team, under the able leadership of Hector Olea, ICAA co-founder and senior translations editor, translates and prepares the documents for online publishing. In this context, archives allow the museum to rewrite art historical narratives from multi-temporal, multicultural, and multidisciplinary perspectives that eschew exhausted national and disciplinary frameworks, as well as the biased reductiveness that characterizes mainstream accounts of these practices. These new narratives suggest a productive alternative to the pedestrian demands of the neoliberal model that often cripple the capacity of these institutions to generate new knowledge, forcing them to constantly recycle previously validated artisan movements. Next slide, please. At the MFAH, the ICAA Documents Project has been indeed the foundation for a series of related initiatives, such as the organization of research-based thematic shows, such as the award-winning Inverted Utopias, which I co-curated with Hector Olea in 2004, as well as monographic exhibitions on artists like Gego, Eloy Tizica, Carlos Cruz Diez, and Antonio Berni. It has also been the foundation for a robust in-print and online publications program. Next slide. Next. And a host of international workshops and symposia. Next slide. It has also served as a motor for an ambitious interdisciplinary partnership with the University of Houston focused on object-based learning. Working with a seven-member faculty team made up of UH faculty, ICAA staff, and representatives of the Conservation Department and Hirsch Library, the ICAA has used the collection to create a critical, immersive educational experience for graduate and undergraduate students. By bringing attention from the start to how artists use materials, processes, techniques, and how their use relates to a broader art historical context, this methodology can significantly expand the theoretical frameworks from which these fields are currently studied, beyond critical issues of decolonization and identity, thereby allowing for more complete art histories to be written. More importantly, at the MFAH, the archive has been instrumental in assisting with an extensive collection building effort focused on the artistic manifestations of the avant-garde in Latin America and Latino USA. Having started near zero, the collection today encompasses over 1,000 works of 20th and 21st century art in all media. Access to the ICAA's primary-based research allowed the museum to circumvent the omnipresent market and bet on artists with proven trajectories and outstanding contributions to modern and contemporary art, who for the most part were unknown in the United States and had absolutely no market. In hindsight, there is no doubt that taking this type of informed risk proved to be an efficient strategy for building the MFAH collection. The kernel of the collection building effort concentrated on independent visionaries and innovators such as the Argentinian Schul Solar, who both in theory as well as in practice set out to transform or reinvent the limits of art. The fact that at that time the market was being flooded with post-war constructive and geometric artworks proved auspicious to this undertaking. Indeed, the historic nucleus of the collection focused on an ample selection of works produced between the 1920s and 50s by constructive artists and groups from Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, and Uruguay. These include outstanding examples of the production of the Uruguayan master Joaquín Torres Garcia and his followers, frequently referred to as the School of the South. Next slide. Among these, a large group of works exemplify the constructive work's vital impulse. Next slide. Grounded in the group's studies of abstract art forms indigenous to Latin America, this fundamental energy or animism is paradigmatically exemplified by Francisco Mato's synthesis of Mondrian's grid with the shape of a llama, the ancient animal of the South American continent. It also finds unexpected correspondences with the interactive sculptures or bichos of the celebrated neoconcrete artist Lygia Clark, who considered them living organisms. Also present is a production of key avant-garde groups from Argentina, such as the Madi group. Amongst these is the cutout frame, first introduced in 1944. This is a playful, inventive way to break away from the pictorial window effect associated with traditional painting, while transforming the work into a dynamic structure that interacts with the viewer's physical reality. Another key innovation introduced by Madi was the interactive structure exemplified by Gyula Kosic's pioneering Royi of 1944 and the Uruguayan Maria Freire's large untitled structure, both of which require that the viewer manipulate the work into a number of different positions. The purchase of the Adolfo Lerner collection of Brazilian constructive art in 2007 allowed the museum to acquire in one swoop over 100 pieces representative of the development of these tendencies in Brazil between 1950 and 1962. These include key examples of Sao Paulo-based concretismo, as exemplified by Valdemar Cordeiro's Visible Idea of 1956, as well as iconic works of the Rio de Janeiro-based neoconcrete movement. Amongst them, Lygia Clark's groundbreaking Modulated Surface No. 1 of 1957 and her Oval of 1959, all of which resorted to perceptual strategies to break down the distance separating the viewer from the work. Another constructive tendency represented in the collection includes artists who experimented as early as the 1940s and 50s with light, color, or water as their primary medium. First conceived in 1946 and completed in 1972, Gyula Kosic's utopian vision for an architecture in space, the hydrospatial city, is one of the first artistic undertakings to address climate change. Convinced that man was destroying the planet, Kosice proposed the city in the form of semi-open modular habitats suspended 5,000 feet above the ground and powered by oxygen and hydrogen harnessed from water vapor in the clouds. Similarly, in the chromosaturation tunnel, a site-specific environment first conceived in 1964 that connects the new Kinder building to the museum's campus, Carlos Cruz-Diez achieved his lifelong goal of making color itself the medium, free from any support or form and unencumbered by cultural conventions. The collection has thus continued to expand significantly into the contemporary area, thanks to major acquisitions by well-established or mid-career artists who stand out for their contributions to the mediums of installation, video, or process-based art. These include such emblematic large-scale installations as, next slide, Maria Fernanda Cardoso's Woven Waters submarine landscape of 1994, made with clusters of dried starfish and intended as a commentary on the destruction of ocean life by consumerism. Teresa Margolles' Lote Bravo of 2005, next slide, please. a work that memorializes more than 350 femicides that have taken place in Ciudad Juárez and El Paso over the last decade. Magdalena Fernandez's deconstruction of Piet Mondrian's emblematic grid with sounds performed by a local ensemble. Carmela Gross's A Negra, a tribute to Afro-Brazilian women. And Ernesto Neto's Sun Force Ocean Life of 2020, the specially commissioned monumental crochet environment designed for Colin and Hall, a big gallery at the museum. During the 22 years since we started the Latin American collection at the MFAH and the archive, modern and contemporary art from this region has consolidated as a hot market collecting and exhibition phenomenon in global circuits. This has been accompanied by the organization of a parallel academic and museum infrastructure focused on this art. Such developments, in turn, have brought about a significant reassessment and expansion of the narratives and frameworks traditionally used to engage these artists and movements. The new scholarship has effectively demonstrated the transnational nature of this art, as well as its equal standing vis-a-vis parallel movements from Europe and the United States. At the same time, it has allowed for a thorough pondering of the affinities and differences between Latin American and U.S. Latino, or what is called Latinx, artists. Both terms refer to art produced by artists of Latin American descent who were born or are active in the United States. This includes, but is not limited to, those who identify as Chicana, Chicano, Puerto Rican, New Yorican, Mexican American, Dominican American, Cuban American, as well as others born in Central, South America, or the Caribbean, who have made the United States their country of residence. These are two extremely heterogeneous groups, mainly united by origin, language, religion, and the shared experiences of colonialism, authoritarianism, and migration. In this context, the institution-wide initiative Aquí Estamos, or We're Here, Latinx Art at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, funded by the Mellon Foundation and the Terra Foundation, will allow the ICAA to implement Latinx papers, a project aimed at significantly increasing the preservation and dissemination of primary source documents of Latinx art culled from private archives and public repositories across the United States. A large portion of these documents are still in the hands of artists, their families, and supporters, making it exceedingly difficult, and in some cases impossible, to access via currently available analog repositories or digital search engines. Hence, the material recovered by the ICAA over the next 5 years will be critical in elaborating courses of study in U.S. universities, as well as museum exhibitions and other curatorial initiatives. In line with these goals, the museum recently established a restricted Latino acquisitions fund focused on expanding the presence of this art in the institution's encyclopedic holdings. The program, a combination of museum accession funds and a growing pool of private contributions, will incorporate works in a wide variety of media by established, mid-career, and emerging artists. The work of these artists represents one of the most vital and exciting areas of contemporary artistic production in the United States today. At the same time, as I have tried to show in this presentation, the MFAH collecting efforts in these until recently underrepresented areas has contributed to the legitimization of artists whose work remained marginalized for decades. This kind of betting to impose new values grounded in long-term research and implementation exemplifies the commitment towards innovation at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. The success or failure of this model is currently being tested in the displays of the new Kinder building for 20th and 21st century art. In the meantime, both the ICAA Digital Archive and the collection remain dynamic works in progress and living testaments to the vitality of avant-garde and contemporary artistic manifestations in Latino America. Thank you very much.
Mari Carmen さん、ありがとうございました。
You'd now like to go into discussion? Now I'd like to go into the discussion session, and please, could you come to the stage I'd like to invite the panelists and Director Kataoka to the stage, please. So we would now like to explore these topics until 8.
First, I wanted to ask Özge and maybe Kara about your relationship with museums and how, because Marie Carmen's presentation was really closely related with the museum functions. And how does your research and archival activity work with museum curator or collection or the museum practice?
I would like to start. Thank you for the question. I think there are different ways in which we collaborate with museums. The first one would be thinking about custodians of the archival materials that we have been working on. One example that comes to my mind is late Hong Kong artist Habik Chun, whose archive we worked on for about 7 years. We digitized the archive, we created the inventory and then uploaded the materials online. But we do not have the resources, or it's not our expertise to keep the physical materials. So in this case, for instance, there were 2 institutions in Hong Kong. One of them was M+, the museum in Hong Kong, and also University of Hong Kong Artistry Department, who were eager to be the custodians of the digital materials. Another example that comes to my mind again, when we worked on the archive, personal archive of the late Singapore-based artist Lee Wan, we started that collaboration with NTU CCA and then the National Gallery of Singapore, basically contributed to the project later, and now they are the custodians. So I think this type of collaborations where we use our expertise about organizing and digitizing materials, and then the museums being the custodians, and then they keep making these materials accessible to the public. This is one way of collaboration for us. The other example that comes to my mind is that several years ago, when the Guggenheim Museum worked on the exhibition on art from China after 1989, our several colleagues of mine, they were part of the research project, and then they provided materials that would be related from the archives, that would be supporting the exhibition, and that was on display as part of the exhibition. These are some of the examples that come to my mind, but also smaller scale projects. So for instance, with M+ in Hong Kong, around 6 years ago, we started a series of workshops focusing on Wikipedia. So we do give tutorials to editors or participants who are interested in editing Wikipedia. You don't have to be an expert, but you can still participate in populating the lesser visible histories. So these are some of the examples that I can think of right now.
Thank you for the question. You know, the history of the Getty Research Institute, we were born out of the Getty Museum. And so, you know, initially we were in service to the museum, providing resources for scholars and the public who had questions about the exhibitions or collections. The way that we work with our external partners, one particular project I'd like to talk about is we have a co-stewardship with the Smithsonian, the National Museum for African American History and Culture. It's a project where we are processing the materials and co-digitizing the materials, but the physical collection will be at the Smithsonian, but we will share that with a joint website where people can access the resources. And then we will have access to the digital materials for our scholars. We also consult with institutions in terms of exhibitions. We also provide numerous loans. I think that we've worked just about with everyone. Another exciting project is that we also provide traveling exhibitions globally for institutions, so particularly Reinventing the Americas. which was an exhibition that examined and interrogated the colonial narrative of the Americas, is now traveling through Brazil, Mexico, and it's one other country I can't remember, forgive me. But the idea is that providing exhibitions for museums that are in spaces and places that are in need of materials or exhibitions, and being able to work with them on expanding those narratives. And one of the things I also want to say about that process as well is that one of the things that's really integral to our process is that in our relationship with museums, and I'll say under-resourced institutions, or small institutions, is finding reciprocity. So as we work with museums that are under-resourced, we find value in their practices because many of their practices are very rigorous. They have to find ways in which the Getty doesn't have to think about how to make things happen, but it's also about the descriptive data and the metadata as well. And so as we provide maybe the exhibition, but the information that comes back to us informs our practice in terms of what we need to learn to be a more inclusive and accessible institution.
Thank you. I will ask a similar question to Daehyung, that you introduced some of your curatorial projects that you have done in the past, but you didn't explain your company, Hzone, and what do you do actually? And then I was curious about how you relate with the museum, and also maybe from your former position that you were in Hzone company, and how did it work with the museum?
It's quite a long story, but long story short, when you shake hands with the person standing next to you, that means H. That's why Hzone. That's the meaning of the Hzone. So basically, I do define the future of the art and the museums and curatorial practices should be based on the conversations. So conversation with the social value and conversation with the global companies. So through these conversations with the multiple layers of this social fabrics, Hzone want to expand the future habitats of the contemporary art, the way the art is produced and distributed and consumed. So I set up my company back in 2008 as part of graduation the project of the Columbia University. So graduation thesis become a company. Then I consulted many companies and institutions and government. In due time, the Hyundai asked me to lead the security partnership program. So I joined the Hyundai as art director, the founding art director for the Hyundai Motor Company. Then I initiated all the partnership you already know, the Tate Modern partnership, LACMA Art and Technology, and Korean Art History, and the Bloomberg Brilliant Ideas and Art and Technology, also the video, the film project. And I also did many interesting projects in China, but it's all disappeared now. After the Hyundai, I came back to my original company, Hzone. Then I worked with BTS. You saw the project. You can Google them. The one outstanding the project I'm working on right now, I've been communicating with the Anthony Gomley over the last 4 years. Now we signed a contract with all the sponsor and the governments and artists to construct the biggest outdoor sculpture in the southwest coastal area of the Korean peninsulas. It will be over 100 meters, the big project. And Yanagi Yukinori is also part of the One Island, One Museum project. Recently, I'm consulting the KCC, the foundations. That's another charitable company. That sound museum has been constructed by Kuma Kenko, the Japanese architect, and Hara Kenya will lead the visual graphic elements. I'm consulting the curatorial directions. and many more.
Kawaguchi-san next. NCAR has inherited the art platform and the basis. There were a number of pre-existing databases, I think. So could you help us to understand more about the differentiation with the pre-existing databases and the reason why the collections are so necessary? Could you talk about the necessity that you had at the background of this? There has been for a long time the idea of creating an all-country Bunkai-san online around 2008, I think, which was supposed to be traversing all of the Japanese museums, which is also a part of the Agency for Cultural Affairs project. It was about our cultural heritage, which included historical museums where the artists are anonymous because we don't know their names. So it was really historical artifacts as well as art artifacts and creations. However, when it came to the individual museums or art museums, they were requested, the individual museums were asked to provide the data. And of course, the curators were interested in sharing their holdings, but they didn't have the time. And they couldn't afford to dedicate so much time and effort to sharing the material or the information. And we wanted to make it into something which is more usable. I don't know how to put it. We want to make it something which could really be launched abroad. As for the conventional 2008 onwards, the basic interface is monolingual. It's Japanese when you look at the details about the material in there and the information about the holdings. So there's that limitation. And 2014, the report called for a platform for launching information about contemporary art, which came out as a result of the workshop and called for more energy for sharing information abroad and the importance of locating and identifying the location of the artworks. But if we went around asking for the individual museums to share their data about the material, we had the basic position of deciding to take a different approach. Nariai Hajime, who is not here, was one of the people who was involved with that attitude. And of course, there is the approach where you have the individual institutions providing us with data. It's also possible to just link and interlink the data of the individual institutions together, but the museums don't have spare the time, or it's difficult for them to be able to share the data, and it's if the Japanese museums change, the Museum Act has been reformed. So the importance of sharing information about their holdings is now being clearly stated in the revamped law. And if Japanese museums are going to be moving in line with that, then perhaps it might be important, it might be meaningful to change their collection policy. But up to now, we haven't been able to really do it earnestly. And the 280,000 or so items in the database that we have is about the same as with our preceding database, which covers historical holdings as well. But the actions that we're taking are separate from the pre-existing database. But we're trying to think of the most appropriate approach to come close to Japanese museum holdings. The roadmap. Currently, you have Japanese artists in Japanese collections. That is what is being covered by the database. But in Japanese museums, there are many non-Japanese artists whose work is a part of the permanent collection. So could you explain, help us to understand more about the future roadmap? Well, the Japanese public collections in Japanese museums, and there's a desire to see Japanese work. So we were looking at the requirement to share information about the Japanese art which is in public collections, but taking that nation element, it is probably necessary for us to be able to talk about non-Japanese artists as well. Looking at modern and contemporary work, a lot of it might actually be from Europe and the United States. There may be a few examples from Asia. So it is still going to require time. So in the next 5 years or so, we hope to be able to expand beyond Japan, but we need to be paying a big deal of attention about the actual steps that we're going to be taking for that. Well, concerning this process, I haven't been moving in together with you, but I've been a part of the committee, so I'm impressed by how much you've achieved. However, building the database is not something which is going to be possible in a day or two. You've taken 5 years to build up to this point. You require a lot of very serious work. There's also the need for financial resources, and we need to really get earnest about this work. I'm just very happy that we've been able to make so much progress. So I'm going to switch languages.
I'll go back to Asian Art Archive. I thought it was interesting that you started in 2000, and Marie Carmen also started around the same time. So I was wondering if there was like a very strong necessity that you needed to start, and also you wanted to really cover Asia. So what was the very strong necessity or motivation to start the archive, and how, I know that you have different advisors across the Asia, but how did you actually continue developing the resources?
Thank you. With institutions that are older than 20 years old, sometimes we think more about the institutional part, but first I would like to reply by a personal urgency that is related to our founding director, Claire Xu. As a researcher herself, when she was doing her master's, focusing on contemporary art from China, she was not able to find any resources. So she had to go to the artists themselves, but there were no archives, no universities, no museums that were holding primary and secondary source materials about their work. So it was more about the field, doing the research in the field. So I think the idea behind the archive actually comes from that personal story. And then it's basically with the collaboration of a couple of people, because at the beginning of the organization, they were 2 to 4 people only. And they wanted to think about what are the accessible museums, what are the accessible resources in the region. And I think the name of the organization also comes from that. The idea that there is an urgent need to document the contemporary moment, and also think about how to connect it to the previous generations. So over time, I would say that the first 10 years of the organizations, the team worked more on the present moment, documenting the present moment. So the researchers that we had in the team, they would go to festivals, they would go to exhibition openings, they would take photographs, video recordings, they would take on oral history projects. And it was around 2010 when the team decided that now we do have the available resources and also the team, the resource is the team, that we can start focusing on the digitization. And with that, we started going to the previous generations. So that's one of the ways that we started over time and how the research collections have developed over time as well. One thing that I also wanted to share is that these research priorities that are shared in the presentation, they did not come out in the very beginning, but they emerged over time. So they were artists who were in conversation with the Asia Art Archive team, and also art historians speaking about the urgencies in the field. That's why I think we were able to, and this is how we were able to identify these research interests so that we can think about the direction of the collections. Because at the end of the day, I think all of our organizations do have limited resources, so the allocation of the limited resources and the impact is something very important for us. So as a small team, this is something that we are able to do, thinking about fields where there is lesser visible scholarship or lesser visible resources or resources that are not accessible publicly. So this is how we've been thinking about how to develop the collection so far.
Yeah, when it comes to the Getty, it's much larger and then also longer history. And it, in a way, probably more difficult to change. But you showed some of the recent changes, including direction of inclusivity and diversity. And when we look at the big paradigm shift of whole art world is looking at what I said at the beginning, which used to be called minority, is now so much forefronted. So when it goes to that direction, you have so much to do as archive, which hasn't really been archived. So what is your sort of strategy to shifting your direction for the inclusive and diversity?
The Getty made a decision right before the pandemic to really consider diversity and inclusion as a matter of parity and equity. It has been working, a couple of things that they did, a couple of steps that they did. One was to really retain a higher firm to help them with the change. One of the challenges, I think, when you're trying to implement a very broad sweeping DAI project is that you need change management. Change just can't happen to people. And often in institutions, people walk in and something changes and it's not a transition time. And then you also have to recognize the diversity of all of the people that exist and how you make that shift and make it in a way that is not harmful, that doesn't cause anxiety. And so, the Getty's been working on this for 4 years, and we're still really in the beginning stages. I don't think that we'll see the policies that we've implemented materialize for another maybe 5 years or so. The thing to do is that it's about working and creating a plan, strategic priorities, and then the most important thing I think is communication, finding that the channels, both horizontal and also vertical ways to communicate that, and then modeling behaviors. And that has to be a huge commitment. And those behaviors can actually be, and often you find that those behaviors, when you do the trainings, they've implemented trainings, it's usually the modeling the behaviors, modeling up. That's where the groundswell is. And so when you see the activity, so they hired a firm, the firm organized committees on the campus, One of the things I do want to encourage, if you are implementing a DAI plan and you want to get the staff involved, be very sure to make sure that you're giving them the right training and support to handle the various conversations, reactions that they will be facing and confronted with when they're implementing a plan. But those are the steps that they took. And now that we're now second iteration of this, where we actually have a value statement, the committees are actually leading the efforts on campus. They have made recommendations to the senior leadership of what, what policies need to be in place. And we're starting to slowly implement them. And so the other part of that, I think, is incremental change, that you cannot make a vast sweeping change when it comes to DEI. It has to be incremental. So things that we did, having gender neutral bathrooms, providing stations for mothers who are nursing, providing access to support, creating affinity groups based on identity, actually talking about that and using the art as a way to talk about these things as well was very positive. But we are very much in the beginning stages and we're still working through it. And then the one thing that I think was really a spot-on decision that our President and CEO, Katie Fleming, did was to hire a sustainability officer, because you want to be able to sustain the policies that you're implementing. Often when you create DEI policies, they get created, you do the work, and then it goes away. So you need some mechanism to make sure that those things will be ongoing. So hiring a sustainability officer allowed the Getty to be able to make sure that our day-to-day practices were in alignment with what the plan, the strategic plan around DEI was, and so that's what we've done. Thank you.
Next question to Daehyung. I'm interested in how major corporations like Hyundai Motors are interested in art, and there are so many private corporations who want to do something with art, but to do something with art doesn't really generate like a visible direct income. And but also what we have been talking about is archiving and digitizing and researches also doesn't really create any direct income. It's more like spending for the future. And what is your take on this issue? And if all these corporations who are interested in doing something with art, would they do something like supporting archive to invest for the future?
It's good question, but it's really hard to answer the right way. Hyundai Motor is just really a unique case. Without CEO's profound understanding and enthusiastic love towards art, nothing has been possible. At the very beginning, it's early the phase of my Hyundai period. It took many failed the proposals to persuade the hierarchical the ladder, but the CEO he provided full support. So now Hyundai has a good the brand image with all those interesting artistic programs, but fundamentally I worked there like over 6 years. For the last part of my tenure there, I educated many, and many of Hyundai members, they become like a big fan of art initiative, and they become an ambassador for Tate and LACMA, MMC, and Bloomberg. So they finally understood through the lens of culture and art. We didn't build Hyundai museums. We built the partnership with the external expert institutions. So those museums, like future visions, that will be never generated from within the corporation cultures, right? Corporate cultures. So with those like really interesting forward thinking and boundary breaking ideas and exhibitions and words and images and films, that gives a really beautiful holistic branding effect for the corporations. So just standing next or behind the cultural institutions to make a huge difference. So now many companies, they're not sponsoring, they're not buying the artwork, they are sponsoring the exhibition on the project. But the final, the pinnacle of my the partnership project, I make a beautiful marriage with the Tate and Hyundai. That's a transnational research center. I have many obstacles, but finally I could persuade all members within the companies. Sponsoring the worldview, the theory. You cannot count the number of audience, but those really unique worldview and philosophy is connected through the Transnational Research Center. That will make a history. So it's a time for the Global South or the Korea and Asia to stand up, and we can invent our own theory and philosophy and the contemporary art scene. Yeah, that was my yeah.
Can you write a book so that I can translate into Japanese? And
yeah, I will.
だいぶ時間がなくなってきましたけど、川木さんにもう一つ伺いたい
So we are running out of time, but I do have one more question for Kawaguchi-san. And you mentioned that you are thinking of connecting to the overseas databases. And so the research portal that had been created at NCAR, what is your outlook on the future for some international linkage? Because we are employing the language to address the English-speaking audience. So what is your image of how we can connect to the outside world?
That's a difficult question, but so I think we have this major challenge of getting the information out to outside of Japan. And actually, before this official opening, public making it opening, we actually started to do this in September, and we thought that we needed to maybe enhance the English version a little bit more before we do official. So that is why we postponed it until March. And we have for this symposium, we wanted to make sure that we had a lot of resources. So what we did was start with the press release, and we are making the preparations. But first of all, we wanted to send out the news that we have this kind of a database, and we started doing a little small news. So we need to actually do this more widespread. So we need to build awareness for them more. And so how would this link to the bigger database after this? It's not visible yet, but at least so this sort of resource is available for people who study the art in Japan or Japanese art, and we at least want to inform this to the research institutes and universities or museums outside of Japan. So if you want to investigate about the Japanese art, then you have this tool available in English right now. So that's the first step that we wanted to take. So that's the first step, trying to increase awareness of the collection that we have, the archives we have. And the next step is that I think each country has this information about art in the country.
And I think they do this, they should have a catalog on the cultural assets. So in France, for example, national art, France would have, called Gioconda. I don't know the recent name, but I think it's the database was called Gioconda before. And this is the collection of the national art, which could be searched cross institution. And in UK, you have the Art UK. So in Germany, it's an old tradition. They have a catalog of cultural assets. It's called the Inventory of Cultural Heritages, which they have produced. And it was done by paper by each state, and then they try to consolidate this, and they try to do this online. So this is undertaken by the German government. So I think each first of all, country needs to get this together by country level. And then in Europe, it's connected within Europe. So maybe in Asia, the Asians, countries need to come together and be connected as a first stage. So that's what I was thinking. Thank you. Then we have about 8 minutes left. So we would like to solicit questions from the floor. We are discussing this in all sorts of different directions, and it's 8 p.m. and your brain's fried, but you do have any question?
Thank you for your presentations. I have kind of a very practical question about these databases, and it's in terms of kind of the type of knowledge production we've been talking about today, especially. I guess I'm wondering the terms of the database itself, like keywords and tags and things like this. How often do you sort of meta edit the database itself as terms grow in popularity in our lexicons and things like that? Yeah, I'm just wondering about the periodicity of that in terms of database management.
Well, to make it easy for searching about tags, how much of our resources are being applied to that is the question, I suppose. But as for the actual operation that our people are doing, it's a very difficult question. With all the levels and the phases of the activities we need to do, there are clear-cut, simple levels. At the same time, you also have the more complex levels which need to be given more thought. We can't say that everything has been simplified to a level where we don't have to give much thought to a process. We're still trying to find our way. We look at the vocabulary. We confirm whether data exists for that or not. But this is really to make our data recognizable, that people will be able to pick up to it, and also it's very much an ongoing process where it's a learning process where we are still trying to find our way to do this. So we can't really say this is how we are increasing the ways of searching for metadata.
Kara,
does that respond to your question?
The systems are easy to build. Metadata management is very challenging. I think one of the challenges is that a couple of things. So in terms of how often you should do it, I think that it has to be an annual process. And the reason why is because if you look at the years, right, so you think about how metadata changes, thinking about the essential metadata that you need, and it's a constant going back into your descriptions and changing it. So much so that we're creating a new division at the Getty the Getty Research Institute to focus on metadata and looking at the through line between the divisions, because metadata exists in everything that we do. we're describing things, whether it's an exhibition, whether we're bringing text into the library, or if we're getting collections. And then it's also about having cultural competencies. And this is where that reciprocity and value between working with institutions really helps, because, if you think about the 20th century, the metadata was created with more of a patriarchal and a more Western lens. So you have to think about all of that work that we have to do now to make sure that we are culturally competent in how we're doing it. So it's a twofold process. The first is to start where we are now with incoming collections to do that work. And then another team has to go back and to do discovery and then change and update a lot of the metadata that exists. And so I think it's probably, as you said, one of the most challenging parts of the job, but it's the one that is the most impactful when you think about the historical record. And so when you look at the Library of Congress and, looking at the records and then how the vocabularies from institutions. So, having a portal and working, that will be so impactful for how we understand our Japanese holdings in the United States and how that work goes back out globally to help other communities understand that work. So I think that archivists would love to talk to you about this all day, but I think that's the process. It's actually twofold, but it is one of the most impactful, but yet the most difficult process undertaking in an institution.
My answer will echo Kara's way of speaking about how the revision of the metadata is one of the most challenging part of building these data sets. In our case as well, we started with the building the core of the collections for many, many years. And after that, I would say for the past 5 to 7 years, we've been thinking more about how we can recreate research journeys on the website. So for instance, for that reason, we worked on two types of relationships, let's say, that you can find in the records. One of them would be about people and organizations, and the second one would be events. So creating relationships between the records so that you can go to one record, and then that record would lead you to so many different related records. So that was the second phase in our case. And I think we are at a point where we do have that conversation about how we do want to think about the metadata. But one thing that I can share with you is that a couple of years ago, in 2019, we started a zine collection within the library collection. And one of the ideas behind building this collection was also challenge some of these categories and the way that we look at cataloging. So in this case, for instance, when we acquire zines from zine makers or artists, we go to them and ask them about how they would want us to catalog the record that we are speaking about. Because oftentimes, let's say if this is a book, I would, as the person creating the record, I would just take the information as it is. There will not be, let's say, extra research about it. But this is something that we've been thinking or rethinking about, especially with zine makers themselves.
ありがとうございました。ちょうどよろしい時間になってきたので、この辺で。
It's just the right time, so I think we will end this. So today we were talking about museum and research, and how we looked at how we can deepen the job we do. So to summarize, we are here in museum, and it's about how many people, the visitors we've got in this exhibition, how much funds we were able to raise. So often we talk about how do we expand on it, but we don't talk about how to deepen it and how much detail do we touch on it and how thorough are we in what we do. Maybe between the experts, the specialists, maybe you understand what a great job you do, but that's often not really understood widely by the public. So deepening and expanding and connecting the activities, I think that is necessary in order to promote art as a whole. So today, we were talking about things that would put us into the deep. So I want to thank the panelists, and please give them a big round of applause to the panelists. So everyone on the stage, thank you very much. With this, we end the International Symposium. And I want to thank the participants as well. Today's interpreters were Akiko Kobayashi, Shio Sato, and Koyoko Yokota. Thank you very much. So with this, we end today's program. Thank you very much for your participation once again.